Pope Francis passed away, and unfortunately, upon his passing, numerous media outlets and pundits started saying that Francis was an inclusive pope, and they're afraid that the church is going to be grasped at by power-hungry conservative cardinals. You and I need to talk about this. Now, Francis wasn't inclusive. If by inclusive you define that progressivist term, that you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want, and you receive moral validation for it, which is the very definition of moral relativism in the public sphere, then no, Francis as Pope was never inclusive. And I've got a series of things that I can point to prove that. But one core thing that we need to establish is, regardless of even Francis's personal preferences, let's pretend that Francis did in fact lean towards validating any one of these movements. The fact of the matter is, as Pope, he couldn't, and therefore he wouldn't have. Now, considering that, Francis, in his own personal spirituality and preferences, made very clear that while he prioritized pastoral tone over doctrinal precision, which has led to, let's be honest, 12 years of ambiguous language that the secular media has always jumped on, we can also acknowledge this insincerity. Francis stood for perennial church teachings whenever he was made to, whenever he needed to, whenever the truth called for it. So, in his address to Italian catechists in January of 2021, this was about 4 years ago at the time of this video, Francis said this: "A catechist always must teach what the church teaches, and that includes the vision and teachings of the Second Vatican Council." He never said that a catechist must teach what their spirituality and personal conscience dictates. In a 2023 interview, Francis said this: "The view of the church doctrine as monolithic is erroneous. If you don't change upward, you go backward. And then you take on criteria for change other than those our faith gives for growth and change." What's he addressing here? St. John Cardinal Henry Newman wrote this wondrous book. It's an essay, really, called The Essay on the Development of Doctrine. And he said this: "Doctrine can develop in terms of its expression, in terms of the way it is taught, but its substance, its core, must always remain intact. And that remaining intact means that the doctrine must appeal back to the same perennial teachings of the church, which means the magisterial authority of the church." Francis understood this well. In his 60 Minutes interview, Francis said this:
"Last year, you decided to allow Catholic priests to bless same-sex couples. That's a big change. Why?"
No, what I allowed was not to bless the union. That cannot be done because that is not the sacrament. I cannot. The Lord made it that way. But to bless each person, yes. To bless a homosexual-type union, however, goes against the given right, against the law of the Church. But to bless each person, why not? The blessing is for all.
Many of us will say fiducia supplicans introduce quite a bit of ambiguity and confusion globally. That's factually true. Objectively, this was true. The document wasn't as clear as it could have been, nor should have been. And so Francis clarified it in a series of interviews after that. The Vatican clarified it. The Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith clarified it. So let's make clear here. Francis never redefined the Church's teaching on marriage and the family. He never redefined the definition of the human person. He never redefined the Church's sexual ethics and moral teachings. If anything, all Francis did was try to bring about his own personal spirituality of pastoral tone and emphasis. And that was what everyone jumped upon. But the fact of the matter is, let's make very clear here, no matter how we try to spin Pope Francis's papacy, one thing we cannot say is that Francis changed the church or changed church doctrine. No. There was no inclusivity by progressivist standards. There's only the invitation to the gospel that is universal and salvific. All are invited into the embrace of Christ. But with that invitation, I want to quote Pope Francis here in 2013. With that invitation, the problem is not sinning, but not repenting of the sin, not feeling ashamed of what we have done. That is the problem. What Francis said What the church has always taught, what you and I ought to know, is Christ invites everyone, but embracing Christ necessitates moral conversion. I cannot live life on my own terms and expect God to bless me. If I am to follow Jesus Christ, I must embrace my cross, which is the life that Christ calls me to, and I must accept moral conversion. So friends, Francis wasn't inclusive, he was Catholic. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Mark Peter.